This episode is a bit confusing to say the least. For an episode centered around time travel, I'm taken aback by just how dull this episode really is. I mean, this is borderline Sister Sitter levels of dull. I suppose it should have been obvious to me given the fact that the title of this episode is the most uncreative and generic thing I think I've heard for this series thus far. Yes, even more than Snow Month. But I wanted to stay positive till the end of it, you know? Just in case something good actually came out of it. That didn't really happen, and instead I got a story about Blossom changing costumes for 11 minutes. When I first saw the name Rainy Day pop up as a future episode synopsis back in 2016, my mind immediately jumped to the worst case scenario. This episode was going to be yet another ripoff. I feared that it would do what a lot of the previous episodes have done before and just regurgitate exactly what the original series did all over again, only much more indolently. But to my astonishment, none of those complications emerged over the course of its runtime. Considering the Powerpuff Girls' best Rainy Day adventure ever is my favorite episode of the original series, Rainy Day having nothing to do with it outside of the title is a huge sigh of relief on my end, because I would have been livid on this one had that been the case. The episode being different in concept, for the property that is a pleasant surprise that really shouldn't be such a rarity in the reboot's first season. That's not to say this episode is 100% never been done before, I wouldn't go that far, but it does something different with the time travel aspect compared to Get Back JoJo from the original, and I'm at least appreciative of that, even if it wasn't completely successful. It's nice having an episode like this for a change. I just wish it did a better job of holding my attention. Rainy Day mostly relies on situational and dialogue-based humor rather than the typical random, out-of-the-blue jokes that don't make any sense in context to the current situation. It doesn't depend on spontaneous instances of the characters going off model or arbitrary references to Mount Everest, but rather good old-fashioned communication amongst the characters, as seen here.
That's the point of a thunderstorm. You can't go outside, especially not with a bunch of metal.
Aw, well, there goes Plan B.
There's some more time taken into delivering each character's specific lines and inflections instead of being in your face about it, although not every joke ends up being a hit. Kinda funny how Best Rainy Day Adventure Ever and this episode are both heavy emphasizers on comedy and jokes rather than action, but that and the fact that the setting being that of a rainy day are ultimately where the similarities end. The episode begins with the girls lying around the house trying to think of things they could do to pass the time while they wait out a thunderstorm that's currently keeping them trapped inside.
I hate rainy days.
This, of course, explains why the title of the episode is called Rainy Day. But that's pretty much where the bad weather plot point comes to a close, because the remaining 10 minutes of the episode completely forget about the idea that it's raining outside and switches focus to Blossom time traveling for some reason. That's right, time traveling. I know it's not wise to judge a book by its cover, as that's something I tend to avoid doing before giving anything a chance, but after finishing said book and realizing that the cover has absolutely nothing to do with the text inside, it kinda makes me question why the story was given that title to begin with. That's like taking Lord of the Flies and calling it Green Eggs and Ham. The only purpose that the rainy weather serves in this episode is to keep the girls inside, and aside from them wanting to play a board game with the professor, nothing about these events take advantage of said fact. This episode's plot could easily take place without the need to mention rainy weather, and you'll see that as the review unfolds, so a title like this feels very extraneous. Let me go back to my favorite episode of the original series for a second here. The reason why the events of the Powerpuff Girls' best rainy day adventure ever works so well is because it relies on the rainy weather to tell the story. It uses it to its advantage. What do kids do when it's raining outside and they can't go outside with their friends? They play pretend, or video games. Sure, the girls can still play pretend when it's sunny, but the activity itself is more common for kids to perform when it's raining outside. It's something that basically any child can relate to. The fact that almost every kid out there has played pretend at one point or another is why it hits so close to home for so many people. Rainy Day, on the other hand, doesn't have much relatability to it whatsoever. Nobody has ever managed to successfully time travel, that we know of. People can't make a connection to these events the same way they do to the girls playing pretend in the original, and that gives it a slight disadvantage in allowing people to invest themselves into it, not to mention the slow plot progression. As straightforward and long as the title of the classic episode is, at least it's relevant to the events of the episode. I know I shouldn't be making a huge deal out of an episode title because it has minimal impact on what actually happens within the episode itself, but it's still an important piece of the greater whole. I mean, the title is the thing that's meant to draw the viewer in. It's important for grabbing someone's attention and convincing them to watch more of the show. I can't think of very many people that would willingly walk into a theater and throw down $10 to go see a movie titled Rainy Day. It's very basic and unappealing to the ear. It doesn't draw anyone in, but rather pushes them away to something better.
Finest under the sea!
Yeah, sure, but where's the pizzazz?
Huh?
Look at this place. I mean, what is the theme here? Underwater? It's boring!
Something like
The Powerpuff Girls, best rainy day adventure ever.
has those buzzwords in there that adds a little more sugar, spice, and everything nice to the mix, and it gets the viewer excited to watch. Anyways, now that I'm off that tangent, let's get back to the plot. The girls all make a bunch of suggestions as to what they could do to pass the time, with Bubbles wanting to go outside and get struck by lightning, while Blossom attempts to convince them to play Oligopoly with her.
Hey, can I see that? Says here that board games are called board games because only boring people play them.
It does not say that!
Isn't it great how Buttercup explains the joke before she even gets to the punchline? I didn't even think that was possible. You know, since I'm in such a positive mood, I think I'll point out another really cool detail that I honestly wish this show would do more often. That's having the characters physically react to their surroundings instead of just floating around listening to dialogue. Whenever I see animators go the extra mile to make characters move or do things on screen while the other characters are talking, I can't help but be won over for making the frame feel less stagnant. And the reboot is no exception to this.
But I think I'll need a nap first.
Not only am I glad they made Bubbles yawn in response to the professor, but it's so cute too. I mean, just look at that face. During this conversation, Professor Utonium agrees to join the girls for a round of Oligopoly after he wakes up from his nap that he's about to take. And he reminds them, as always, not to play in the lab. Do the girls A, go play in the lab? They go play in the lab. Or, I should say, two of them attempt to go play in the lab before they're stopped by Blossom, who's once again accused by Buttercup for being boring despite the fact that she's taking responsibility into her own hands. Bubbles even commends her for making some good points, but proceeds to ignore them anyway so that the two of them can go break a bunch of stuff.
What does this do?
Whoa! What is... What?
I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it. I'm not gonna make the reference. I made the reference. This seems out of character for Bubbles to do, considering she's normally shown to be well-behaved, if a little short-tempered. Buttercup I understand because she's made to be an asshole in this series, but Bubbles, not so much. It feels like she's almost forced into joining Buttercup's antics because there needed to be a way for Blossom to get thrown into trouble without another character standing by doing nothing. Buttercup and Bubbles proceed to mess around with a bunch of the professor's things until they come across the Time Dasher, a time travel device that allows the person who enters it to travel to any point along the space-time continuum. Of course, the girls don't know that, but they just go around hitting random buttons and switches anyways because that's totally what they would do, right? Right. Luckily, before Buttercup can enter the machine to try it out, Blossom steps in once again to keep her sisters out of trouble because it's in their best interest that they follow what the professor told them. So despite her sister's unwarranted behavior, at least I can compliment Blossom for taking on the more mature leadership role for once because that's what's expected from her character on a regular basis. But unfortunately for her, Buttercup doesn't take too kindly to this.
Dude, stop being such a dud and just...
Oh, bitch, get out the way. Get out the way, bitch, get out the way.
So this is where Act 2 essentially begins, as we see a cave woman version of Blossom emerge from the smoky opening of the Time Dasher and smack a well-deserved Bubbles with her club clear across the room. Unsure of what to do, Buttercup and Bubbles quickly fly back upstairs to play Oligopoly with the professor now that he's woken up from his estimated 2-minute and 16-second off-screen nap. Yes, I counted. It should come as a surprise to no one that the professor is a total moron in this episode due to his oblivious reactions to Blossom's obvious changes in appearance and behavior, but more on that momentarily. Remember how Bubbles is supposed to be a programmer? Well, she references this aspect during their time together playing board games in this one line right here.
Come on! Mama needs a new pair of Mr. Bunny's coding books. Yay! Fun!
Too bad she can't read dice though, because she clearly rolled a 5 there if I'm not mistaken. I appreciate the show for at least giving a nod to this character trait, as it keeps up with the continuity of Bubbles having a hobby in computer science, but that's all it really amounts to. A nod. During their family game time, Buttercup and Bubbles tried to hide Blossom's cavewoman persona as much as they possibly can with an unbelievable amount of success, because the professor manages to believe that her primitive behavior is a result of, well, see for yourself.
Blossom, I see what's going on here. Your blood sugar is low because you haven't had lunch yet.
Anime tropes, huh? I can't say I saw that coming. But I'm sorry, I just can't like the professor when his entire existence is summed up to being a stupid dad character whose incompetence outshines all of his other traits. It's one thing for him to make an honest mistake or believe a lie that the girls do a good job of pulling off, but this is just too blatant for him to miss. As he leaves the room to go make the girls sandwiches, the two try to figure out how they can solve the problem without telling him and get Blossom back to normal before the professor figures out what's been going on. It doesn't really amount to much though.
Okay, I thought it through and...
Well, the years start coming and they don't stop 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 coming.
Huh?
What I don't get is Buttercup's logic here. See, she concludes with Bubbles that they should just throw Blossom in the Time Dasher over and over again until she's finally returned to normal, because that'll fix the issue with Blossom being a prehistoric version of herself, but what's stopping Blossom from telling the professor what they did anyways? There's really no way out of it at this point, because even if the girls did return their sister to normal, she'd still end up telling their dad and they'd still get in trouble. But then again, I suppose Buttercup is willing to take any risk necessary to not get in trouble, and she might see this as a way out as long as she can convince Blossom to keep her mouth shut, though I still think this situation is a lost cause. The two of them throw Primal Blossom back into the Time Dasher and send her through to another time period, this time with her returning in the form of what appears to be a Greek philosopher who spouts fancy words to sound smart when it's actually just a bunch of nonsense that doesn't actually mean anything.
But alas, what is genius? Is it the sprouting forth of word from the subconscious? Or is it simply an affect developed by the cunning of civilization?
Aw, man! She's worse than before!
So, genius is essentially just having the ability to talk and live in society. Boy, I must be the next Einstein or something because I do both of those things. And how is an intelligent philosopher with the ability to communicate worse than a cave person who doesn't even comprehend their surroundings or basic human etiquette there, Buttercup? The professor follows up with the sandwiches as promised, and the girls fly back up to the living room just in time for him to serve them, only this time Blossom has changed her outfit and dialect to match her Greek archetype. Does the professor notice this change?
Wait a minute. You didn't think I'd notice. I forgot the drinks. Silly me.
Nope. Next, we get a montage of the girls asking the professor for more sandwiches while they repeatedly chuck Blossom in the Time Dasher, hoping to return her to normal, only to end up getting a different time period every single time she comes out. Now, here's where I get a little bit iffy on the whole Time Dasher thing. How does this work exactly? Is this the same Blossom getting transferred back and forth between time periods? Or are there multiple Blossoms that exist in different time periods that are simply just getting swapped around with each other? Blossom herself has no memories of Bubbles and Buttercup knocking her into the Time Dasher because she acts completely unaware as to what they've done to her, so it begs the question as to what exactly is going on here. If it is the original Blossom, why does she forget? And if it's a different Blossom each time, why doesn't she question the things going on around her? The flow of time that is presented in this episode feels very disjointed, to say the least. I use the term disjointed loosely because time travel over extended periods isn't exactly something that has been proven to work in the real world as of yet, so I can't exactly say for a fact that the way it is portrayed in this episode is physically impossible, but if the majority of time travel stories have taught me anything, it's that there's likely to be several plot holes that reveal themselves when time travel is brought into the equation, and this episode is no exception. After consuming sandwich after sandwich, the girls eat enough to make the professor go to the store to restock on food, giving them enough time to take Blossom down into the lab and hopefully fix her once and for all. That doesn't happen though. So Robo Blossom, as she calls herself, arrives to destroy Buttercup and Bubbles for all of the trouble they've put her through with the Time Dasher business, which is questionable because she suddenly knows what her sisters did to her. Robo Blossom over here decides that murdering her sisters is the best way to get back at them for what they did to her, and let's be honest here, that's the most logical thing to do. And she proceeds to chase them all around the lab, shooting lasers with the intent to kill. Hey, by the way, remember when it was raining outside? Just when Blossom's about to annihilate her sisters into oblivion, the professor comes in to save the day unintentionally by stopping Blossom's tirade and returning her to normal, while simultaneously punishing Bubbles and Buttercup for not obeying him. Keyword unintentionally, because he is again portrayed as an incompetent dumbass who thinks that Blossom got a haircut without taking any notice to any of Blossom's robotic characteristics. So much for being an intelligent guardian role model. Overall, the lesson being taught here is a good one to encourage. Be sure to obey your parents. Don't mess with things you're not supposed to. The gist of the episode gets this stuff down pat, it's just a chore to get to the lesson in the first place. Rainy Day is not terrible. I wouldn't classify it as interesting by any stretch of the imagination, it's just boring. And I'm really not sure what's up with the ending. Buttercup throws a random sandwich into the Time Dasher and it comes out as a sentient 1930s cartoon character, which really doesn't make any sense at all because that's not how time travel works, but you know what? Who really cares at this point?